Hi everyone, this is Mr. Petty, and I'm going to talk about how to think about positive and negative numbers. Now, when you're young and you are playing with toys, it's really easy to then start thinking about numbers because you can see 5 blocks or you can see 6 dots on a domino. But then what we find when students get into negative numbers is they get confused because you can't see a negative number. So what teachers often do is they represent negatives in some way. And in this series of videos, if you see a blue dot, that's going to be like a positive number. That would be like 3 blue dots, and you could say that's like 3 crayons. But the red dots will represent negatives, and we don't see negatives in real life because you can't have like a negative number of trees or a negative number of blocks, but mathematically we can talk about negatives, and that will help us to solve problems in the real world. So that brings us to an interesting question. What does nothing look like? Of course, if you have no crayons or no blocks, you know what that would look like. There wouldn't be any crayons or blocks. But mathematically, we can talk about a positive and a negative number canceling out to nothing. If you put a positive 1 and a negative 1 together, we could say that that's nothing. So think about that when you see one of these blue dots combined with a red dot. This together makes 0, or we could say it's nothing, even though we do see the dots there. Here's another example of this. As you can see here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 red dots, and I have 4 blue dots. We could think of these in groups, and you can see that for every red dot there's a blue dot, and a red and a blue dot cancel out to nothing. So really, even though there are a lot of dots here, we have, mathematically speaking, nothing. Let's look at a lot of dots, some positives and negatives, and ask yourself, is this number that's represented here positive, negative, or 0? So the way that you can do this is count up the positive dots first. So you can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 positives. So I have 5 positives. And then count up your negatives. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 negatives. We can clearly see there are more negatives than there are positives, and remember that every pair of these basically cancels out to 0. So think about this. I have only 5 positives and 7 negatives. So after all this canceling happens, what's going to be left, positive or negative? And if you said negative, then you are right. This would be a negative number because there are more negatives than positives. Now let's look at this one. Again, the same question, is this number positive, negative, or 0? I'll let you count them up, and you can pause the video if you need to. Hopefully in this case you noticed that there were 7 positives this time, and for negatives we have 6. So if you were to combine these and each pair of a positive and negative was really nothing, then you can see that you have more positives and this number would be positive. Let's do one more of these. Count these up and decide if you think this number would be positive, negative, or 0. In this case, we have 9 positives, and if you count up all of those negatives, you will notice that we also have 9 negatives. So this number actually would be 0 because we have exactly the same positives as negatives. So even though it looks like there are a lot of dots here, mathematically we could say this represents 0. If you take that same idea, you can apply it to numbers. Let's not even look at the dots. Just think about this. If I had a negative 10 and I wanted to combine that with a positive 16, do you think this would be positive, negative, or 0? Well, you can see right here that I have only 10 negatives. I have 16 positives, and since the 16 is larger than the 10, after all the canceling happens, this would be a positive number. We're not too concerned about what this number is yet, But you should think about that. Do you know what the answer to this is just by thinking of those positive and negative dots? So in the next part, we will talk about actually adding these numbers together, subtracting them, and we will develop some rules for how you could think about these quickly without having to see the dots. And remember, you can see all of our learning videos at room10learningchats.com.